So about two-thirds of my audience are international. That could be Canadian or British, Australian. That's about a third. About a third's American, and then about a third is something other than those that I've named. So I want to talk about tariffs, and does Congress have any ability to rein Donald Trump in on the issue of tariffs? This is Senator Warren from Massachusetts, and she was on Colbert the other night. Major breaking: Elizabeth Warren explains that she hatched a plan that could stop Donald Trump's tariffs and stock market manipulation. It would require just enough votes in the Senate to declare that there isn't an economic emergency, which would end Trump's ability to enforce tariffs. Kind of. So I'll explain what's happening. So she's saying in this video, as she's talking to Colbert, she's explaining that I'm trying to see if I can get Colbert in the frame. So she's explaining that she has a plan to have a bill in the Senate that would say there is no economic emergency if they can get enough Republicans. They only need a handful, half dozen or so Republicans to sign on, and I think they can get that. Then that could stop Trump from using this. And it would also, the other thing that she wants is to put the other Republicans on record saying that they're not doing this. This is the kind of thing that legislators tend to do to each other, is try to get the other on record so that they can campaign against them. But that's secondary. But it can stop it. Kind of. Let me explain what's happening here. So here's the United States Constitution. This is Constitution of the United States, Article 1, which is dealing with the legislative branch, because when the founding fathers put this together, they were like, well, of course, the legislatures are going to be the most important thing. We think about it very differently. We think about what's in Article 2, and Article 2 is the executive branch and the executive power vested in the president. In fact, they even had some weird debates during the Constitutional Convention about maybe even having an executive that was a committee of maybe 5 or 7 members, but that's secondary. We don't have to worry about that. So let's go back to Article 1, Section 8. And this is all the powers, all the major powers that the Congress has. And the very first thing that they talk about is that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So the way that they were thinking about this at the time was, okay, sure, Congress is the body that's charged with dealing with all kinds of taxes, and tariffs are just one form of taxes. And when we're talking about taxes, we're talking about imposts, like things imported into the United States. They aren't using the word tariff, they're using imposts here. But what they were primarily concerned with was not even that. They were primarily concerned with like that New York doesn't lay a tariff on Pennsylvania. They even talked about this kind of thing, and Pennsylvania not lay a tariff on New York because, you know, that then the state of Pennsylvania would get rich off New York, things coming from New York into Pennsylvania or vice versa. And there would become this tariff war. Kind of like what we're experiencing in the world right now with what Trump is doing with China, and China's doing to Trump, and Trump's doing back to China, and China's doing back to Trump. Okay, so they didn't want that scenario to be happening. So it has to be uniform throughout the United States. That was the emphasis that they placed on this in the debates. I read all the debates. This was the topic of my dissertation. Okay, so at any rate, this is where that the power comes from. But it says Congress shall. So why is Trump doing it? How does he have the power? Well, okay, let's look at the CNN article, and then we'll look over at just some AI to understand what's going on. Congress gave the president's power over tariffs. They could always take it back. Well, theoretically, they could take it back. They don't necessarily have the ability to do it very quickly, but yes, theoretically, if enough of them wanted to, they could do it. Bipartisan bill would give Congress a say on tariffs. Congress may not yet want it. Okay. 7 Republican senators signed on to a bipartisan bill that would place a check on the tariff authority Congress has given to presidents over the course of decades, which Trump is now using in an unprecedented way. They kind of weren't expecting Trump to do what Trump is actually doing right now by just, declaring a tariff war and trying to radically reshape foreign policy and international trade. The bill, sponsored by Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell and Republican Senator Charles Grassley, would require the White House to justify tariffs and then give lawmakers the opportunity to reject them within 60 days of enactment. Okay, so that would actually be pretty good. And there's precedent for this sort of thing where like the president has the Congress actually has the ability to declare war, but the president can act immediately if he has to. Right. So if there is some kind of war that breaks out and it has to send troops, the president can do it because, and again, part of it is the Congress is supposed to be mature and deliberative, and the president's supposed to be quick and act immediately. But Congress delegated some of that authority to the president and then said, but you have to justify this within 60 or 90 days. I don't remember what it is. So there's a precedent for this sort of thing. Okay, the bill is being introduced by a similar bill is being introduced by Don Bacon, a Nebraska Republican, in the House of Representatives. It's time that Congress restores its authorities here, Bacon said on CBS News over the weekend. We gave some of that power to the executive branch. I think in hindsight, that was a mistake. The likelihood of this bill becoming law is remote, at least for now. It's also not clear what the lawmakers' remedy to end tariffs votes in the House and Senate would work. Okay, so this is the CNN article saying it's kind of a gloomy picture whether they're actually going to get that back. So I was just, as I was thinking about this, I figured, okay, let's use our AI to some good purposes and see what it has to say. So I asked if the Senate declared that there was not a state of emergency, could that prevent Trump from changing tariffs? And that goes back to what was being said here with Senator Warren. Can they, make okay, no emergency, so you can't use it. Okay. So the Senate's declaration that there is no state of emergency could impact Trump's ability to change tariffs, but it depends on the legal basis he uses. This is my understanding as well. If Trump relies on emergency powers like those under the National Emergencies Act to impose tariffs, a Senate resolution terminating the emergency could block or limit those actions by removing the emergency authority. So if he's saying because of emergencies, I'm doing X, and you remove the emergenciness of it, then that does for one piece of the puzzle. However, Trump could use other statutory authorities that don't rely on a state of emergency, such as Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This allowed the president to adjust tariffs for national security reasons without declaring an emergency. So he could say, well, it's a national security issue that I have the authority to make this change. And so he could still go on. Short of some kind of significant restriction by the Congress, he's just going to go on. Okay, Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, which permits tariffs to address unfair trade practices, also without requiring an emergency. And this is going to be his strongest suit here, I think, because, his whole argument is that this is unfair trade practices because we're selling only 10 billion of this to you, and you're sending 100 billion of this to us, and it's not fair because you're saturating our markets. Okay. And that's really a dopey argument. International Emergency Economic Powers Act, though this typically requires an emergency declaration, so a Senate resolution could constrain it. So if he's used this, which it looks like, I think that's what he has argued, that this was from, I'm trying to see where it was. In the article here, it was talking about something with that, like why he was doing what he was doing. And if he was using that basis, then that could actually restrain it. But that's only one of the bases by which it could be restrained. Okay, so it concludes with this. If Trump invokes non-emergency powers, the Senate's declaration would have little direct effect. So if you're trying to do what Warren was suggesting that she can do to stop Trump, it's not really going to stop Trump. Okay, the courts could also intervene if the tariffs are challenged and deemed to exceed statutory authority, although judicial outcomes are uncertain. And that's not because of some conspiracy, but just because the courts see things in certain ways and don't see things in other ways. Okay, in short, a Senate declaration ending an emergency could limit tariffs tied to emergency powers, but wouldn't prevent Trump from using other legal authorities to change tariffs. So, what does what's the remedy here? So the remedy is that you go back to the U.S. Constitution, and you have to have enough congressmen willing to step up to to create a bill to say we're taking our tariff authority back, and then that passes the House, that passes the Senate, but then that has to go to the president to sign. Probably not going to sign that. So you have to have 2/3 in both houses to override. And if you get that, then they can override whatever Trump was doing. That's the only real thing that's going to work. Okay, I hope that helps you understand Trump's tariff powers and can they take it back or whatever. What Warren is saying is not going to stop anything. She's going on and making a big deal about this. She's a politician. Politicians do that. And she's, I'm going to stick it to them. You can't. There's not the authority there short of 2/3 of Congress saying, no, we're taking our power back. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you right now. Thank you for the time and listening to me. And thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine and the world that we live in.